Welcome back, class, to another lesson here with discussions in SIOP, structured approach, and observation protocol. We're going to be looking at chapter 6 in the book today. This is this book here. We're getting basically going through this chapter. We're going to be adding a little bit more information as well from my own experiences and research. This is their model for Chapter 6, which is talking about interaction and the need to have interaction in the classroom. Apparently, they're assuming that there are some language classrooms that don't have a lot of interaction, and the need for it is very important, which I would think is obvious. When you have language classrooms, my thought is to make sure that you're doing activities that require you, the teacher. You start with low-level students, they need you for almost anything. So you need to show them and teach them how to do things so that you can now take things and put them aside so that you can give that to them for homework. But in the classroom, you're going to need lots of interaction. And so we're going to talk about some things and the benefits of doing interaction. When you're developing a class and class curriculum or course activities, you're going to want to look for materials that will allow for maximum interaction. This is especially true in the classroom because they need to learn how to do that. This may be their primary practice location. If you're dealing in an ESL environment, it's going to be a little easier to allow them to do interactions outside the classroom. If you're in an EFL environment, it's going to be a little more difficult, and so classroom is now becoming very important. That's the place where you can practice and where you have a native speaker. You should also be trying to break people up into groups. Group and pair work is just a wonderful, wonderful tool in your classes, and I would highly recommend that you make sure that you have those types of things set up. I typically have every day I'll have activities that require small group or pair work, and I want to have students mix and match so that you can get sometimes weak students with weak students and weak students with strong students, and so you can have that variety and they can help one another and feel more comfortable. You're going to want to identify what is this? You're going to want to identify ways to not only allow them to interact, but allow you as a teacher to find ways of analyzing how they're doing. So I used to have a friend of mine who would have a clipboard, and he would have a list of functions that he wanted them to be able to do during the class, and if he heard a student do that, he would give them credit for it. And eventually students started watching, hey, what's he getting credit for? And they wanted to follow along. And you don't need to give them credit for it, but you want to find ways that you can assess the activities that are going on in that interaction to verify that your plans are actually bearing fruit within your students. You may want to explain the purpose of the interaction. In fact, oftentimes it's a good thing to do. There are times where you want to be a little bit more clandestine about what you're trying to get them to do. But for the most part, you want them to know. As far as you're going to be focusing on vocabulary building or grammar understanding or speed reading or whatever the function is. And you're going to want to practice questions and how students can elaborate on their comments and things like that as you move on with the interaction. So you just don't want short things. I often have a little thing I do like this where I say you got to have a full sentence. I'll ask a student a question and they'll give me a yes answer. I said, no, I want a full sentence. Why did you come here? Hungry. No, I need a full sentence. I would make them do that just so that you can get them to elaborate. Why do interactions? Well, it's stimulating. The way they put it in here, it's brain stimulation, where you get to get your mind active, and that's very true. It's also more fun. Typically, most times students, when they're trying to learn a language and they're listening to it in a second language, the ability to interact is going to be far more interesting to them. So it's going to increase motivation. It's also going to give them time to practice, which I mentioned before. Practicing in class is probably for some students, the safest and best place for them to learn, at least until they learn to become independent language learners. So it's a good place for them to practice with having all the interaction with each other and with the teacher. It's also a time to focus on the goals that they have. Whereas when they're in other classes or when they're outside, even though they want to learn language, that's not the focus. So you can help them. You can help them focus on that. So when you're in your classrooms, you want to try to speak as little as possible. Get them to talk as much as possible in your typical language classroom. Now, if you're dealing with upper level students that are trying to figure out how to survive a lecture, then you're going to be practicing the lecture in class, which means you or somebody is going to be giving some type of scaffolded lecture, and they're going to learn to take notes, and they're going to learn to garner information, be able to summarize and whatnot. So that's something different. For the most part, if you're going to be dealing in a language class, you want them to interact as much as possible so that they have time to practice, they have time to process. You're going to want both oral and written. Again, it depends on the level that they're at, how much of each you're going to be doing. It also depends on the age that they're at. Students who are older and already have a first language under their belt are going to have an easier time doing writing than little young ones who have no first language writing ability, and they're trying now to learn a second language writing ability. It's going to be more difficult. So the amount of those is going to be different, but the fact that you want to have maximum interaction in the classroom is generally the procedure that you want to have. I could also say that if there's any way that you can add technology to your classroom, and it's going to be an advantage to you, use it. Technology all by itself is a motivating tool. And they've done research to indicate that just by having the technology, it's a motivating tool. Don't ask me why. You bring some form of technology into the room, and it's like a magnet. Everybody comes in and they want to play and do something with it. And so you might as well take advantage of that. Obviously, you don't want to bring in the technology just for technology's sake. Use it to your advantage. Take advantage of the tools that you have at your disposal. Years ago, our education toolbox, we had about 4 or 5 tools in there. Now we have hundreds. So we should be able to take advantage of them, whether we're dealing with a speaking activity, a listening activity, reading and writing. It doesn't really matter what it is. If you can use that technology, it's going to be a plus to you and your students. Cell phones now, a big deal. I've had one teacher say that they actually do little votes in class where they ask a question and they have to respond by typing into a number or typing into their answer into some voting system, and then that gets displayed on the screen in the front of the class. So that type of activity with technology. I have had students who listen to music and try to fill in the missing words, and then they can discuss about the meaning of the song. But that's using the technology. As I mentioned earlier, when you're going to be doing interactions, you should try to have a variety of groups. Typically, this is just I just brainstorm in my head. If I'm going to have interactions in my classroom, and let's just imagine I have a 90-minute class. If I have a 90-minute class, I'm going to try to at least plan for 7 different activities. That does not mean I will be able to do all of those activities. I may not have time depending on how things go. But I may have something like a warm-up, some type of question type of activity that tries to spur them on to speaking, give them some type of free conversation that's geared toward a particular topic. Maybe something that I saw in the news or something I heard on the radio. Maybe it's something that's geared toward their grammar and vocabulary information at that time. I don't know. I may have then a discussion where I want them to work on. I want them to answer the question that's hopefully of interest to them. That's why we're having the discussion. But I also want to try to have it focus on, again, where their weaknesses are so we can help strengthen them. I'm going to have some type of a grammar focus. I don't want it to be long, and I don't necessarily want it to be a major thing, because even though students are interested in grammar, they're not nearly as interested in grammar than they would be in, for example, the discussion or the task that they're going to be doing. But you're going to want to have some type of grammar focus. Again, try to hide it in something else, but you'll still want to have it. I typically give my students at the beginning of a semester some type of grammar diagnostic, so they get a list of things that they don't know, that they want to learn. Hopefully they can use that to go off and study by themselves, but that's also, I can use that during the semester as some type of a grammar focus. I'm going to have some type of a vocabulary focus. And again, it's got to be in the meaningful context. So I've got to somehow see the vocabulary that we want them to learn and infuse that into meaningful activities, meaningful readings for them. I'm going to have a reading focus. And whether that's extensive reading, graded reading, or a reading of a scaffolded type of story that's going to be helpful to them, that's focused on what their needs and motivations are, but I should have some form of focus on reading. I may have a task focus. I want to give some objective to do, something, again, that's meaningful to them. If they're students bound for college, it's going to be something related to that. If they're students that are bound for high school or they're bound for a job, I'm going to change the task so it's going to focus on what they can find useful and practical. I may have a cool down, which may be a time to use everything that we've talked about for that particular day, or maybe some type of language game where they can just relax and come down from all of the more focused things that are in the middle of the class. And so that's 7 different activities that I may have in one class time. And in each of these, they're the ones that are doing the work. In the discussion, they're talking in a small group or in pairs. In the grammar focus, you're going to give them something to read in a small group, and they have to talk among themselves and try to figure out what the story means or what the grammar elements are inside. In the grammar focus, you may do, there's a whole bunch of little activities that you could do to focus on grammar. If you're giving them a list of words that they need to learn for this particular week, or if you're generating them as the class is going and you're putting them up on the board, it may be that they have to make sentences or make a story out of them, or any number of things, but you're still focusing on useful vocabulary practice. Same thing with the reading focus and the task focus. These are all in small groups or pair work. So there's not a lot of whole class type of activities. Lastly, I would say that you want to give them homework to further the interaction outside of class. The reading is not going to be nearly as much, but listening, they're going to have to interact with whatever listening materials that they have. If they're going to be giving them a job where they have to interview somebody, they have to go out and talk to somebody, that's part of their homework. Again, I'm trying to increase the interaction to outside of class. Okay. The nice phrase here, interaction, could probably put this into what I would call pushed output production. But that's some of the things that I would do. I would have frequent opportunities for oral and written, take advantage of the technology, and use groups. Okay, question, wait time. You're doing interactions with a group of students, you're putting them into a group, and there are some students who are waiting. They're trying to process, or they're scared, or they don't know what to do, or they haven't been used to it. How long do you wait? There is no set guideline for this. There are people who wait a long time. There are others who will wait for a while. They may try to push, but then eventually they may try to ignore. Which means if you're beginning to ignore a student because they're not reacting well in a group, then you may want to get them into smaller groups, or get them so that they feel comfortable in whatever situation they're going to be comfortable in. Again, pair work, I generally see everybody talking. There's less pressure for them to try to act or react if they're within a smaller group. You may want to keep them within the same gender, again, to lower the affective filter. But for you as a teacher, you want to look, you want to listen, that big word that I use. You want to notice what's going on and try to find a way to encourage that student to interact. The book here suggests using the L1 if necessary. I would tell you to avoid it as much as possible. They're here to learn the second language. Now, I don't want the affective filter way too high. And if that's going to be the case, then I want to possibly use it. Use it as a last resort in order to prevent the affective filter from going too high. And you can begin to feel that as you're interacting with the students. They're starting to feel this pressure, like, okay, I don't want to do the task anymore because I'm too frustrated. All right, at this point now you just give them the language so you can lower that affective filter. There are times where you want to keep them in the language, and there are other times where you want to say, okay, time to give them some release so they can come down. This is controversial. There are some people who very much like the direct method, and they don't want to change at all. They want to stay in that target language. That'll be up to you. Understand the pluses and the minuses that there are on both sides. And that's pretty much this chapter. There are some examples as well, and then there's the observation protocol, who did a good job and who didn't do a good job. Interactions, in my opinion, in a language learning classroom should be the center of the class. There's going to be everybody doing some type of interactions. Again, it should be in smaller groups, pair work, group work, and you as a teacher, you're walking around facilitating, listening to what people are saying. Of course, now at the beginning, before they actually start doing some of these things, you may need to model and sample so that they understand how to do the process. But for the majority of that time, you know, the scaffolding is pretty much taken away, and the only thing they're doing is working in those small groups. Okay? And so that's interactions, and that's all for this chapter. We're going to get the other chapters in the coming weeks. If you do have questions and problems, please check me out online or on